Hello, everyone. This is Kellen Lynch back with another Permit Navigator episode. And today we're continuing our talk with Richard Berg of Terrapin Architecture and Fred Kimball. We're going to cover some more of the basics around ADUs, cover some common questions, and then use the City of Port Townsend's informational guide on ADUs as a step-by-step and just walk us all through what they're really looking for. And as always, this program, this Permit Navigator program, is sponsored by the Rotary Club here in Port Townsend. ADUs at their most basic are accessory dwelling units, and they're seen as an accessory to a main house, and they are actually allowed throughout Port Townsend. But what we've noticed is that not a lot of folks are pursuing them, even though they might have the space. And the reason why Housing Solutions Network is really going after them is because we see them as a viable option for, some sort of affordable housing because they're often rented out. So I kind of want to get us started here with you two by asking, what sort of questions do you often field from folks, or what do you suggest when someone approaches you, when considering building an ADU?
Well, it's a potential source of income for somebody. Step number one, if you're going to rent it out, it's an additional income stream. A lot of the ADUs I've been associated with have been for potential caregivers, for retired folks. They start to look out into the future, and if they want to age in place, they can use an ADU for somebody to help them around the house. ADUs are also in our times right now. If we build ADUs, they're a great place for a certain part of our population that needs housing for a place to live. There's an awful lot of folks that are going to be perfectly happy living in a simple ADU while they're getting their feet underground.
Yep, I'm actually one of those people. I live in a 600 square foot ADU with my partner, and we're very happy to be there. It's really the only realistic form of housing we feel like we could have right now, and it's also really compatible with our needs. Richard, what are you normally suggesting to folks, or where do you see the value in ADUs?
Yeah, well, one thing I was going to add to what Fred said was that for somebody who does see having an ADU as a advantage in terms of a place down the road where a caregiver could live that would help them age in place, it can be great to go ahead and build it now, and it could be part of the solution to housing shortage in Port Townsend in the meantime until they need to use it in a different way. Mm-hmm. But I think certainly if you remodel part of your house to make it into an ADU, whether it be a basement or a back addition or something like that, that is typically a fairly low cost kind of thing to undertake in terms of dollars per square foot, and the return on renting it out can be pretty good in terms of the amount invested. If it's it's a separate unit in the backyard or over the garage or something like that, the investment is more, certainly for new construction, but I think it can almost always be rented for more than the carrying cost of building it. Mm-hmm. And so it can always be seen as a financial advantage.
Right. And I mean, as we talk about the financial angle of this, we definitely should mention that in Port Townsend specifically, there are restrictions around short-term rentals, specifically because of businesses like Airbnb and their monetization of our housing stock. So there are some short-term rentals allowed within the city, but by and large, the city is not encouraging and is constraining folks building rentals or transitioning spaces into rentals that could be used for Airbnb or other programs like that. Because we do really want to have rentals here, but more for folks that are going to be here longer than a weekend and hopefully longer than a month. So,
yeah, I think the rules are that any unit that meets the definition of an Airbnb, that meets the definition of an ADU which means that it is accessory. It's a second unit on one piece of property that's accessory to the main house. Those are not allowed in the city of Port Townsend to be used like an Airbnb anymore for short-term come and go rentals. The city wants those to become available as long-term rental units because that's what is needed.
Exactly. So what are the other considerations are you encouraging for folks to consider when, they're just getting, their feet under them in terms of considering doing an ADU? We have folks coming to us really at the very start of their own imagining of what they could have. What are you suggesting to them at the outset? Fred, why don't you start?
Well, you have to consider whether you have room, if you're in an existing residence, whether you have room for an attached ADU or unit within your existing home, if you can divide it out and come up with a small place, or is there room for an extra footprint on the property that you're living on? And if you're starting from scratch and planning to build a house and want to add an ADU with the entire project, you need to make sure that you have that plan figured out. You can sequence it any way you want. You can build the main house first, build the ADU second. You can build the ADU first, build the main house second, but you just need to make sure you're leaving room for everything on the site. There are a set of rules and regulations as to how much of your lot you can cover, and setbacks and all that stuff still apply, and the way you hook up the utilities and everything are also taken into consideration.
Richard?
Yeah, I think that's true. You kind of have to figure out, I think the first thing to figure out is, does it seem like it's likely to work financially? All right. Okay, so this is the City of Port Townsend's information sheet on accessory dwelling units. The way to find this was introduced in a previous edition of this series. So if you need help finding it, you can go back and watch that. But it's a pretty good set of information about ADUs. As you can see here, one of the things is that ADUs are allowed in the city's single-family residential districts, R1, R2, and R3. So if your property is in one of those three zoning designations, you're eligible to build an ADU. There is one other residential zoning district called R4, which is for multifamily zoning, multifamily housing, and ADUs are not allowed in R4.
One of the things that differentiates ADUs here in the city as opposed to the county and a lot of other places, in fact, is that there are no owner occupancy requirements anymore. So that's a big deal in the city. Yeah. So as I understand it, someone could, have an ADU, have a main house, and rent out both and not live there in either one.
That was just recently enacted.
Yep.
I think it's important to point out that this is, we talk about it, the ADU, it could be either attached or detached. And this whole program is set up for both.
And this first clause here kind of addresses that. It says if the ADU is in an outbuilding and separate from your house, there's a maximum of 800 square feet. And if it is part of your primary residence, then it can be up to 1,000 square feet. And then the other important thing here is that under no circumstances shall the two buildings together, plus a garage or whatever other covered spaces you have on your property, should not exceed the total lot coverage that's allowed. Most of the property in Port Townsend is in the R2 district, and the rule in R2 is for a regular single family house, the maximum lot coverage is 35%. But if you have an ADU on your property, that allowable lot coverage is increased to 40%, and that's part of what the city does to encourage the construction of ADUs. This next one is that they don't want the front door of the house and the ADU to both be on the front of the house facing the street. So the way to get into the ADU should be located somewhere else. This we already talked about. The accessory dwelling unit shall not be used as a short-term rental. And if you want to put an ADU in an existing building that you have, let's say a garage, you want to convert a garage, and the garage is not in conformance with required setbacks. In other words, if it's closer than 5 feet to the side lot line or whatever, they allow that, but they just want the entrance door to be 5 feet to a property line. Go
I was
ahead.
going to say, it really seems like the city is encouraging the development of ADUs. They've created the policy through, I'm sure, some advocacy work here in this area. And so we have this fairly liberal ADU policy, whereas when I was in Bellingham, they only allowed ADUs in one area of the whole city in terms of every house being able to theoretically have one. And it was a big fight to spread that outside of this one neighborhood. And here we are in Port Townsend, and we're allowed ADUs in 95% of the city. We're just not seeing a very rapid adoption of them. So it's an interesting thing of having the ability to, and yet not seeing many people taking advantage of that.
Yeah, well, and that could be that times have changed in terms of need and demand for housing. And, in Port Townsend, this is part of the way that the city is trying to solve that problem, whereas that may not have been the case in Bellingham. So,
well, I think we both have the housing need and the demand, and there's some gap in either understanding or motivation, which I feel like is what we're trying to close that gap on, right?
Yeah. This clause about parking is kind of an interesting one. The basic city policy is that every single family house in Port Townsend, unless it was built before the introduction of the zoning code, is required to have 2 on-site parking places that are defined as 9 feet wide and 19 feet long. And then if you want to have an ADU, you have to provide a third one on your property. A lot of times that's kind of a stumbling block for being able to provide an ADU, because these city lots aren't that big, and 3 parking places takes up a lot of space. So it either means that there's not enough room for an ADU, or it's like if you have your ADU, you won't have any room for a garden or something because the rest of your lot is taken up with parking. And there's been a recognition of the fact that that can be challenging. So they've kind of instituted this policy where if the property owner can demonstrate that there's no way to provide parking on site, that you can provide an on-street parking space for the ADU instead. That is being pretty liberally interpreted at this point, that the city would rather see you build the ADU and let you do the parking on the street than have you not do it because of parking.
Right.
I think the on-site parking isn't added into the lot coverage, is it, Richard?
It is not included in lot coverage, but it is included in impervious coverage of the property, which also can cause problems, because if you have a lot of impervious coverage, then providing stormwater management for that can get complicated. How does a pre-existing ADU that did not go through the permitting process become legal? We're not really dealing with that issue here, but it could be a way that an ADU could come into existence. A legal ADU could come into existence, and basically it needs a meeting with the city and a kind of a negotiation over what needs to happen in order to permit it and make it legal.
Some of that will require building code issues.
Yeah, I think usually as long as it met the building code that was in effect at the time that it was built, that's what the city is looking for. So it doesn't necessarily need to meet like newer, more stringent energy code requirements, for example. If it met the energy code requirements of, that were in effect 20 years ago or whenever it was built, then that's considered code compliant. This information about utilities and so forth is pretty much true whether you're talking about an ADU that's inside your existing house or one that is separate but on the same lot. And what it says is that both units can be served by the same water and sewer service. In other words, the ADU can tie into the water and sewer lines that serve the house. it can be run off the same electrical service, provided that there's enough power in the electrical service to serve both units. They do emphasize here that the homeowner and the renter of the ADU have to be able to get to shut-off valves and electrical panels and so forth, so that a way to provide access to those things for the renter has to be figured out. The heating, like both can be heated by one single furnace or heat pump or whatever, that's allowed if they're both in the same building. If it's a separate building, it has to have its own heating unit. Smoke detectors have to meet the current rules. And if your ADU is inside your existing house building, but separated, the smoke detectors have to all be hardwired, and they all have to be wired together.
When thinking about developing an ADU, folks are, dreaming of, what they want to see on their property. They'll do a site plan, they'll do some building plans. They're taking those steps. How much time are they investing in that? And, from that point of drawing up their first building plans to actually seeing the place, under construction?
Well, I think that kind of varies depending on who you're working with to work on your plans. But I would say in our office, for example, we usually spend some amount of time, maybe a couple months or something like that, working with people to come up with a conceptual design so that the idea and the sketches show the configuration and size and so forth of the unit that the people want to build. And once that's been agreed upon, that everybody says, yes, that's what we want to do, then usually takes another couple of months to create a set of construction drawings based on that plan idea. And once those construction drawings are done, then they can be given to contractors, and contractors can use them to put together a cost estimate, a detailed cost estimate. And then also at that same time, they can be submitted to the city or the county for a building permit application. And in the city, again, this varies, depends on how busy things are, but in the city these days, that permit review might take 4 to 6 weeks before the permit is issued. They may have questions, they may come back and say they want a little bit of additional information and that kind of thing. And in the county these days, it's taking more like 8 to 10 weeks. So that's, it's overall, it's kind of a 6 to 8 month process.
Okay. I think it's worth also pointing out that, that's the sort of the custom approach. And there are some modular type buildings or alternative sort of ways of going about getting an ADU on a piece of property. But they also take some, it takes a permitting process, and it also takes some planning, site planning, to make sure that you can get a modular pre-built structure on there, or if you're going to go completely alternative and use shipping containers or something like that, you're still bound to the building codes and the zoning codes.
Right.
Yeah.
In the process.
Yeah, using a modular or pre-designed kind of plan can definitely save a certain amount of time in the planning and designing and drawing process. But there's still a little bit of work that needs to be done by a local design professional in terms of a site plan showing how it's going to be sited on the property, usually some engineering to local standards, and often a foundation plan, because sometimes that doesn't come with those plans and with those modular buildings. But it can definitely shorten the time period that's involved. One thing that I did want to point out, there's that city document about ADUs is pretty good, and it's pretty applicable whether you're talking about an ADU in the city or the county. But out in the county, there are a few differences one of them is that the size of an ADU, allowable ADU, is bigger, up to
Mhm.
1,250 square feet out in the county. And also, a lot of times on county property, you might have an existing outbuilding of some kind, like a barn or a shop or a studio building of some kind. And it is allowable to take up to 1,250 square feet of a bigger building and turn it into an ADU. But in those cases, the county may want a restrictive covenant that goes with the property, even if you sell it, that says that you're not allowed to expand the size of the ADU into and take up more space in that existing building.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, the rules are pretty similar, and that city document is pretty applicable to building an ADU in the county.
I believe that the county also has a similar document on their website.
Mm-hmm. They do. Yeah, and the benefits, right, are similar whether you're in the city or the county. You're not only producing more housing, more building stock that is mostly naturally going to be more affordable for folks. It's a potential source of investment for that landowner, and it's a very flexible, unit, right? It can be rented out to just any renter, or it could be they're widely considered mother-in-law units, right, or caregiver units, or they're there to fit the need of whatever the property owner really needs. And I think I personally and HSN would love to see folks taking advantage more of the fact that we can develop them here, and we can develop them beautifully. And we'd love to, grease the skids for that to happen just a little bit more frequently than what we're seeing now. And this effort here through the Permit Navigator is one of the things we're trying to do to promote that. Yeah, there's so many great ideas, and we're always pushing upstream with
Yeah, but I think if we can make it easier for people,
totally.
then people may be more inclined to do it.
Absolutely. It's dawning on me that folks might not even know what ADU stands for, right? Or like how these things are built or even considered. And it's exciting to think all the potential gap to make up to get folks up to speed. So we're going to continue working here with the Permit Navigator and getting good content out to folks. One of the next videos that we're going to be producing is about septics and on-site water, constraints and challenges. We're going to be speaking with a local stormwater and wastewater engineer and hear about what his work entails and the common questions that he's asked. So once again, thank you to Richard Berg and Fred Kimball for taking the time to talk to us about ADUs and this effort towards creating more affordable housing here in Jefferson County. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you.